As many of you know, the theme is smoking and other tobacco use among women and girls. But a couple of housekeeping items first. Um, Regarding Wi-Fi access, you have any questions about this? Ask Charlie Brooks because it's not my area of expertise, but he got me through it yesterday, so I'm sure he can get you through it. Seemed to work pretty well. And then even more so for those of you who may want continuing medical education credits, if you have any questions about how to do that, please see Charlie. So I want to begin with some thank yous. I want to extend really a warm thank you to our VCBH administrators whose hard work and dedication truly make this conference possible every year. If it relied on just me, I'll tell you it would not happen. So Charlie Brooks has been just tremendously helpful, but also Susan Enos and Noelle Savoyan, more behind the scenes, tremendously helpful in making this possible. And also a shout out to Dr. Diane Galima, who organizes the excellent poster sessions every year, including this year, and just keeps an eye on lots of things about the conference and problem solves when we need it. I want to acknowledge the generous grant support that we received from the NIGMS, National Institute of General Medical Sciences, COBRI program, the NIH FDA T-Course program via the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and the University of Vermont's Larner College of Medicine Dean's Office, the university's Vice President's Office for Research, and the Department of Psychiatry, all of whom contributed in small ways to make this conference possible. And then to each of the presenters, I'll thank you in general now and individually as we go through the course of the two-day conference, but you're the heart of what makes this successful. And then I want to say a few words on this year's theme. And when I was preparing these remarks, the thought came to me, why women's health? Why are you focused on it? So I wrote down 5 thoughts that came to my mind, but I'm hoping it's something we can play with as we go on the conference, and people can add on or refine mine or totally tell me why I'm wrong on mine, whatever. But I think it's an important question to ask yourselves. So the first thought I had, well, because women and girls represent half of the world's population. That's a good reason unto itself. But historically have too often been excluded from health research. So we have to continue to be mindful of that and correct that history or do the best we can. Second, smoking and other tobacco use have unique adverse effects on the health of women and girls. And we're going to hear more about that this morning and throughout the conference. Third, smoking or other tobacco use among women is associated with greater risk for serious multi-generational adverse effects. Deep interest of mine and many others, and we're going to hear a lot more about that. Fourth, historically, the uptake of smoking differed in U.S. women and men. So if we want to understand patterns in adverse effects, we have to look at gender-specific patterns, and a great example of that is lung cancer rates. They follow a different pattern just because of differences in the onset of smoking. And then lastly, U.S., and this is another one that's deep in my heart, U.S. women and girls are experiencing greater socioeconomic and rural smoking disparities than men, and that's an issue that requires immediate attention. It's very serious, and it's having serious adverse impacts. So please add on as we go through the day and tomorrow. So now I want to turn to welcoming Dr. Kathleen K. Tracy, who is our UVM Larner College of Medicine Senior Associate Dean for Research, who has generously agreed to take time from her truly busy schedule to share some opening remarks in this year's conference. Dr. Tracy has been at UVM for approximately 1 year, and I could not be happier about her joining our university. First, she brings extensive administrative experience to this position from her time at the University of Maryland School of Medicine, where she was, and you'll hear the energy in this, professor of epidemiology and public health, vice chair for research services, epidemiology and public health, head of division of preventive medicine, and director of their clinical and translational research informatics center. So you have to have a lot of energy to hold those positions. What pleases me most, though, is and its greatest relevance to this year's conference is Dr. Tracy has deep expertise in women's health with a concentration on cervical cancer prevention in underserved populations. So just spot on target with everything we're about over these next 2 days and beyond. She's published nearly 100 peer-reviewed articles in a variety of fields, engaged in numerous interdisciplinary collaborations, has been PI, co-I, or sub-team lead on multiple research studies totaling nearly $100 million in external grant support. And so as this year's VCBH conference illustrates, the university has a deep commitment to advancing women's health. And so, Dr. Tracy, please come up and say a few words.
Morning, everyone, and thank you for that kind introduction, Steve. You know, it's a pleasure to welcome you all here to the 11th Annual Vermont Center on Behavior and Health Conference. And as you gather here today, whether you're gathering virtually or in person, I hope you're excited about the journey that will take place over the next 2 days. For over a decade, this conference has served as a vital platform for addressing a wide array of issues faced not only in our local communities, but also by individuals across the nation. Previous conferences have explored topics ranging from substance use disorder to rural health and beyond. This year, our focus is on the critical issue of smoking and other tobacco-related behaviors among women and girls. And as Dr. Higgins mentioned, women's health has been a common theme through my research profile from the get-go. And so I look forward to continuing to promote that, to celebrate that, and to advance that here in the College of Medicine with many of you. Our roster of presenters this year includes experts from across the nation and around the world, experts who can address this issue on both a national level, a local level, and an international level. Over the next 2 days, you'll hear from Dr. Melissa Kramer from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, Dr. Mark Levine from the Vermont Department of Health, and many, many others. I'd specifically like to extend a warm and sincere welcome to Ina Bacchus, the outreach representative from Dr. Peter Welch's, Senator. Spend all my time with doctors. That's my default setting. Senator Peter Welch's office, who will be speaking, I believe, tomorrow. Correct. I'd also like to extend a special acknowledgement to our keynote speaker, Dr. Lucinda from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Dr. England's work has been pivotal in the study of tobacco exposure and its effects on pregnancy, fetal development, and offspring health. I also want to give a special thanks to Steve, the director of the Vermont Center on Behavior and Health, a university distinguished professor, and the Virginia Donaldson Endowed Professor of Translational Science. Dr. Higgins is one of the most influential and important leaders in the field of substance use disorder. His work in contingency management revolutionized treatment approaches for patients with substance use disorder, providing one of the few effective interventions that can be used to reduce smoking and alcohol use. Round of applause for Steve for his dedication and leadership of the conference. I don't know how many of you know the story, but the Vermont Center on Behavior and Health actually grew from Dr. Higgins' Human Behavioral Pharmacology Lab. The center has gained prominence as a center of research and mentoring excellence in addictions with an innovative theoretical orientation grounded in behavioral economics and behavioral pharmacology. The center's research portfolio has evolved to increasingly focus on vulnerable populations, such as pregnant women, individuals with serious mental illness, and also health outcomes like birth outcomes, breastfeeding, and hospitalization rates. The missions of both the Vermont Center on Behavior and Health and that of the Lerner College of Medicine are to advance research that is of benefit to the communities in Vermont and around the world. The center's commitment to advancing research that focuses on our most vulnerable populations, particularly in the area of women's health, is especially dear to me, given my own program of research. Smoking is a major risk factor for both breast and cervical cancer, so this year's VCBH conference and the focus on smoking in women and girls offers the opportunity to better understand how smoking in women and girls, especially in rural populations, creates additional and ideally remediable risk for cancer in women. Not only does the center advance world-class research, but it is also committed to training the next generation of scientists, a commitment that is also shared by the College of Medicine. The center's T32 program has been continuously funded since 1990. Round of applause for that. That is a long time. And it is home to an excellent pre-doctoral and postdoctoral training program in substance use and health behavior research. As one of the College of Medicine's Center of Excellence for Biomedical Research, funded by the National Institute of General Medical Sciences, the center was recently awarded Phase 3 funding to continue its important work. The Vermont Center on Behavior and Health is one of the crown jewels in the college's research portfolio. As you embark on the 11th annual conference, my hope is that the next 2 days will be informative, will create opportunities for collaboration, and will inspire you. Thank you again for being here. Enjoy the next 2 days, and welcome to Vermont.
Well, you can see why we all love Kate after just being here for 1 year. Thank you very much. And especially for bringing attention to our T32, and many of our pre-docs and postdocs are here today, and they are really an important part of what we do. So at this point, I believe if Charlie can make it happen, we are going to transition to the remarks from our Senator Peter Welch. Yep. So what do I need to do, Charlie? Okay.
Hello, this is Senator Peter Welch. I am so proud that the University of Vermont and the Larner College of Medicine are home to the Center on Behavior and Health. The center's work to understand and address disparities in health is critical, both in Vermont and really all around the world. As the chair of the Agriculture Subcommittee on Rural Development, I especially appreciate the center's research on rural health disparities and the translation of that research into practical interventions for Vermont's communities and beyond. As deaths from drug overdose tragically increase, understanding and confronting the deepening risk of substance abuse dependency is critical to addressing the crisis. This year's conference, the topic, Smoking and Tobacco Use Among Women and Girls, demonstrates the priority of women's health. I admire this focus, especially as efforts to undermine and control women's health care have proliferated in our country. From the topics of how women are targeted by the tobacco industry, including e-cigarette makers, to the links between tobacco use and physical and mental health, I know that the research and learning shared today will promote health equity, well-being, and longevity for women. Thank you for this work and enjoy the conference.
Well, that's you know, it's very interesting to me that we just send a request and a few words on what we're planning for the conference to the senator's office, and he comes up with this. So you can kind of get to see how you get to be a senator. You really can do a good job of bringing issues together. And he already added something to the reasons for focusing on women's health because of all the political things that are going on that are deeply affecting women's health. So let's keep adding on. All right, so now we're going to move to the beyond the opening welcoming remarks to the program. And it's my honor to have an opportunity to introduce this year's keynote speaker, Dr. Lucinda England. Dr. England's work has focused on studying effects of tobacco exposure and of individual components of tobacco exposure, in particular nicotine, on pregnancy, fetal development, offspring health, and on translating this information into public health messages. So I've been following her work for years. And if you're interested in this topic area, inevitably you will know her work. Her research has included studies of tobacco use in pregnancy in diverse settings, including Sweden and Alaska. Developing effective messaging strategies requires an understanding of how tobacco companies market a spectrum of products, including NRT, smokeless tobacco, and cigarettes to women and girls. And you heard the senator remark, and that was not anything I gave him. So it's really an important issue and something we'll be hearing about more during the conference. And yeah, I look forward to a critically important topic. As new products become available, new and effective public health approaches are needed that respond to and anticipate industry marketing tactics. And they are like just masters at marketing, trust me. So, I mean, you all know it, you don't need to trust me. So that's really important. And so we're gonna really need to up our game to try and protect women's health. So we're going to hear more about that throughout the conference. In way of background, Dr. England received her MD from the University of Kentucky College of Medicine in 1992 and completed residencies in pediatrics at Cincinnati's Children's Hospital Medical Center in 1995 and in general preventive medicine at the University of Colorado Health Sciences Center in 1998. She completed training as an officer in CDC's Epidemic Intelligence Service in the highly regarded Division of Reproductive Health in 2000. And that's, well, I'll say more in a second. As postdoctoral fellow at NIH's Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, she conducted research on tobacco and pregnancy outcomes, including preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, and preterm delivery, and on smokeless tobacco use among pregnant women. She then worked in the area of tobacco and reproductive health at CDC for over the next 20 years. And that's really the work that has impacted my own work. And she's also served as the medical advisor for the Tips for Former Smokers campaign and as a writer and reviewer for numerous Surgeon General's reports and providing subject matter expertise to the World Health Organization, the NIH, the FDA, the CMS, the EPA. Anytime the federal government was involved in women's health, Lucy often had some role in it, I think is a way to think about it. And then she retired from a wonderful career at the CDC, a very productive career, but being a lifelong learner, she's currently a fellow in addiction medicine at West Virginia University, where those of you who have followed the opioid use epidemic know that it is just, you couldn't pick a state where it is raging more. So they are really fortunate to have Lucy decide to join them in efforts to curtail that epidemic. And so we're lucky to have her with us today. So Lucy, please come up and we're gonna have Mark help you with the slides. Thanks for being here. Yes.
Get yours pulled up in just a moment. There you go.
Can you hear me? Is that right? Okay, very good. All right, thank you so much for that nice introduction. And just let me orient to the keyboard here a minute. Okay. I have no disclosures. So I'm going to spend about the first half of the talk on new products, describing new products, patterns of use, so a little epidemiology and industry strategies around these products. This is probably going to be pretty familiar to people. And a lot of it's going to be covered in more detail later. But the second half is mainly focused on health effects. I'm interested in periods of developmental vulnerability. So that would be pregnancy, childhood, and adolescence. But I'm only going to focus on pregnancy for this. I feel like there's been a lot on adolescence recently, which is great, adolescence and tobacco, but maybe a little less widespread attention to pregnancy. So globally, the burden of combusted tobacco-related morbidity and mortality remains enormous. So over 1 billion smokers worldwide and almost 800 million deaths a year. In the US, the current smoking prevalence is 10% in women and 13% in men, and the gap between mortality in these two groups is narrowing. And e-cigarette use is now higher in female youth than in male youth. So other reasons to be concerned about women and girls. These are the products under the purview of, let me see if I can get the, sorry, let me get the pointer up. Okay. So these are the products that are under the purview of the Center for Tobacco Products. Synthetic nicotine was added last year, so that should be included in this. But then we also have tobacco industry owned nicotine replacement therapy, and that's under CEDAR, so they have different review process. But some of those products are really sold and marketed more like recreational nicotine, so maybe something to start thinking about when we think about tobacco products. Traditionally, we haven't had to worry about that group. So with e-cigarettes, we're now up to our 4th generation of products, which is characterized by a switch from free-base nicotine to nicotine salts. So they're less bitter, they can inhale more deeply, more efficient nicotine delivery, which is really relevant to this population of developmentally vulnerable people. And there's some data on these 4th generation products maybe having unique effects in the airway with immune suppression and airway injury that needs attention. So with this change to nicotine salts, there's been increasing concentration of nicotine in products, and it's just escalated. This has been referred to as the nicotine arms race. In the US, there's no limit. There's no federal limit on how much nicotine, either concentration or how much volume, like there is in many other countries. The UK limits it to 20 milligrams per ml, but we don't have that. I think Canada has the same. So this graph shows total e-cigarette unit sales from 2017 to 2022. So it's gone up by about 300%. And the yellow bar is the highest nicotine strength product. So that's 5% and above. And that's gone up from very, very small percentage now to over 80%. And at the same time this has been going on, the price of these higher nicotine strength products has either been stable or even gone down. Whereas the lower strength products, the prices have gone up. So there's an incentive potentially for people to purchase the higher strength products. A lot of my patients have no idea what strength their e-cigarette products are. So if they're basing that on price, they could easily choose a higher strength product. Okay, so these next 3 graphs are set up all the same. This is NSDA data from 2021 using separated by age. So this side is the 12 to 20-year-olds, and this side is going to be the over 20s. Boys and men are in blue, and girls and women are in yellow. And then we have past year, past month, past year, past month. So this is any tobacco use, smokeless, e-cigarettes, cigarettes. And so you can see that it's lower in the younger age group, but pretty close in prevalence, and then more dominated or more prevalent in males and for any tobacco use. Here's cigarettes only, so much lower in youth, so that's great. Again, higher in males. And here's just e-cigarette use. So there's a flip here. So for the younger groups, the prevalence is higher, and it's higher in females. And it's actually past month use, or past year use in females is over 13%. Okay, and this is probably people have seen this. I see this everywhere. This is NYTS data for 2022, and you can see of all the tobacco, any tobacco use is really dominated by e-cigarette use. Combusted is 2 to 2.8%, so that's gone down. That's good. And then all the oral products are all less than 2%. So this domination by e-cigarettes has been the case since 2014. Here's some trend data from the Truth Initiative. It stops at 2018, unfortunately, but if you look at the orange dotted line, that's e-cigarette use in youth, and this is showing it really going up in 2014. Cigarette use in youth was going down pretty steadily and then flattened a little bit. There's some concern that this may reflect some of a gateway effect from the increase in e-cigarette use going on here. And then you can see in adults, this is e-cigarettes at the bottom, and the green dotted line, that's flat. So I was going to show pregnant women next, but this is just a reminder that non-disclosure rates are really high in pregnant women, and we really rely for surveillance on self-report. So these data are old, but we took pregnant women from NHANES and compared their self-reported smoking to their cotinine levels. And so pregnant women are on this side, and this black part of the bar is the non-disclosure. So these women said they didn't smoke, but their cotinine levels were in the range of active smoking. So it's about 23% in pregnant women, about 10% in non-pregnant women. So there's a lot of stigma around this. This is going to be concerning for surveillance, for calculating quit rates. Women tend to over-report quitting, and in randomized trials, we have to have cotinine validation to have any confidence in that. So here's a trend graph for smoking during pregnancy. These are birth certificate data, which I hesitate to use because they're probably the lowest ascertainment of any data source we have, but they're all women with a live birth, and they generate these estimates every year. Birth certificate collects data for all trimesters of pregnancy. So this information is any smoking during pregnancy. They don't collect data on anything but cigarette smoking. So there's been a really steady decline that goes back farther than this graph shows. This also hides some disparities. Rates are around 15% for American Indian Alaska Native women and 18% in West Virginia. So there's an 18-fold difference between the highest state, which is West Virginia, and the lowest state, which is California, under 1%. Other sources that we have for looking at tobacco use during pregnancy are PRAMS, which is sampled based on birth certificate data. And they collected a little differently. They asked women after they've had a live birth if they smoked in the 3 months before pregnancy or at the end of pregnancy. So they're missing that whole section in between. For 2016, their estimate was around 8%, so a little higher. NSDA is 10%, PATH's even higher. So that just gives you an idea of how much discrepancy we get with different sources of data on pregnancy. Fortunately, cessation rates are really high in this group. Women are very concerned about the health of their babies, and they quit, and they usually quit on their own, either when they're planning a pregnancy or shortly after they become pregnant. So I think this can make it hard to do cessation trials. By the time you get a group of women in pregnancy who are eligible for a cessation trial, the ones who can quit easily have already quit. And those tend to be women from higher socioeconomic status, lighter smokers, and it's also associated with strong beliefs about the dangers of smoking. And then unfortunately, relapse rates are also really high. So about half of those women then relapse in the postpartum period. For prevalence of e-cigarette use in pregnancy, we have PRAMS data. Like I said, the birth certificate doesn't collect it. So for 2019, using PRAMS, the before pregnancy e-cigarette use estimate was 4.3%. Most of that was dual use, and then the rest was e-cigarettes only. And then during pregnancy, it was 1.3%, and that was about equally distributed between dual use and e-cigarettes only. The dual use was stable from 2016 to 2019 at 0.7%, and e-cigarette only use increased a little bit from 0.4 to 0.6%. So those estimates are pretty low. So that's encouraging. Again, though, if we look at other data sources, the estimates are going to be a bit higher. With respect to factors that are associated with e-cigarette use in pregnancy, this is from the same PRAMS analysis, in particular younger age. So if you look at the the estimate before pregnancy, in the less than 20-year-olds and during pregnancy, they're quite a bit higher, and they're more similar to what we saw with just the estimates in that age group. And then e-cigarette use is also associated with lower socioeconomic status and other substance use. Cessation rates are still high, especially for e-cigarettes only, but again, we have to remember these are self-report, and we have no validation studies similar to the NHANES results I showed you earlier for e-cigarettes. So we don't really know if women report their e-cigarette use accurately or not in pregnancy. In terms of cessation interventions, I just wanted to note, because NRT is going to come up later, that the latest U.S. Preventive Services Task Force assessment gives NRT an I for insufficient evidence, so they don't recommend for or against it. There's not a lot of strong evidence for pregnant women. And then the latest Cochrane review is a little more favorable to pharmacotherapy, but they still note that the evidence is really weak. So accordingly, ACOG recommends that NRT should only be considered after a thorough discussion of the risks and benefits with the patient, and only when there's a strong intention of the patient to quit smoking. So this slide highlights some of the tobacco industry's activities around promoting alternative products to combusted cigarettes. Before 2006, when Judge Kessler ruled that tobacco companies violated the racketeering laws and deceived the public about the harms of smoking and of light and low tar cigarettes and low nicotine cigarettes, and for marketing to children, and also before e-cigarettes were introduced in 2007. So going back a bit, in addition to the aggressive marketing to youth that everyone knows about, starting in the 80s, they focused some of their attention on not only health issues and safer cigarettes, but also more socially acceptable cigarettes. So this was things like cigarettes with less side stream smoke, less odor. That was a very important issue for women. So that marketing was really targeted to their female audience. They also, around in that decade, there was a lot of attention about the health effects of secondhand smoke, including maternal child health issues like SIDS, and that was very threatening to the tobacco industry. So they worked really hard to undermine the science around secondhand smoke, and they also started thinking about other products that they could entice women with that didn't have that worry. So later they started introducing products into the market for women with children, interestingly. And this is about the time they also started promoting the benefits of nicotine. Before that, they talked a lot about how great it is to smoke and how good that is for you, but then they really started focusing on nicotine in the 80s. And then in the 90s, they started to see NRT as a business opportunity instead of a threat. Their internal research suggested they really didn't have to worry about this having a major effect on smoking prevalence, but it could be used as a product to sustain smoking. And then in 1999, with the development of the IOM report on reducing harm from cigarette smoking, clearing the smoke, industry folks were invited to participate in the production of that report. And they didn't really talk about harm reduction before that, but I think they learned from that process. And so they started associating themselves as perpetuators of harm reduction and around that time. And if you look at their website, like if you go to Philip Morris website, it's all over the place, their role in harm reduction. So soon after that, we see this conceptualization of that concept. This is an internal document from Philip Morris. This is an internal presentation, and this is adverse health outcomes here. So this is risk is increasing. So they've got conventional cigarettes up here, and they've got nicotine aerosol down here, but they're also really interested in what the public health acceptable level of risk is, because that's also something they can influence. Perhaps their potential reduced exposure products, they don't really use that term anymore, but that's an older term for some of their quote unquote safer products that weren't really safer. So that might remind you of this public health framework that we use a lot. So this is actually generated later. Oh, this Philip Morris slide comes from 2003. So they were on this as their usual. So combusted products are at the top, nicotine only products are at the bottom. This is fine. This is nicotine's relatively safe for adult smokers, but this doesn't really reflect vulnerable populations, developmentally vulnerable populations. So probably, and this placement isn't meant to be perfect, especially for non-combusted products. It's not meant, nobody's claiming they know exactly where that goes, but there probably should be for pregnant women, children and adolescents, there probably should be more space here. But I think it's interesting the industry kind of came up with that idea. So this is how RJ Reynolds envisioned that spectrum of products and risks. So they've got everything here. This is a 2014 shareholders report. If you ever have time to look through this slide deck, it's really interesting. But they've got everything from NRT to cigarettes. The only thing that's missing is dissolvables, and I'm pretty sure they had dissolvables in 2014. So you might think, oh, this is really good. They're moving away from combusted products to less deadly products. But combusted products still make up over 90% of their revenue worldwide. So I think it's more just they're expanding their consumer base. They want more broad appeal to people who are health conscious. And actually, heat not burn is really catching up now. It's pretty close to e-cigarettes in sales. I mentioned earlier that RJ Reynolds started playing around with smokeless products for women. The first product that they came up was called Revel, and I can't find a picture of it anymore online. I used to have it, but the heading under it said something like, for women who don't want to expose their children to secondhand smoke. So that was out for a while in the early 2000s, and it had a woman's hand on it. And it resurfaced a little bit later looking like this. There's nothing about children or secondhand smoke that I could see, but it still really looks like it's targeting women. It's a dissolvable or a lozenge. This looks like I don't know, some lotus yoga thing anyway. And there's lots of language around social acceptability. So spitless, simple, clean. They use a lot of those kinds of words with that product. This product, Lucy, is literally named with a female name. This is a gum. They use a lot of pinks and kind of sunset colors. And they also use some social acceptability language like discreet. It's not NRT, and it's not regular chewing gum either. And then this product, Rebel, is actually a pouch, and it also has a lot of that same language, discreet, oral hygiene friendly. Women traditionally in tobacco internal studies, they have not been interested in oral tobacco. But they're still trying. Companies are still trying. And they have to have instructions on how to use it because women just aren't that familiar with oral products. So a key to promoting these kinds of products, alternative products to cigarettes, is assuring people in the scientific community that nicotine is safe. So in the 1980s, the industry started funding a lot of work around nicotine and things like cognition, performance. They love to do studies on like flying a plane because you wouldn't want to get on a plane with a pilot who is not at their best. This is an issue of psychopharmacology that they put together. A bunch of these articles are by industry-funded scientists, mixed in with legitimate articles as well. They did symposia around the world. They published the proceedings in these nice hardbound volumes. And then this is when they also started implementing their PR campaign, comparing nicotine to things like caffeine. They compared it to watching TV, hormone replacement therapy, but caffeine was their big one. So they really wanted to get people kind of used to the idea of nicotine as something that could be helpful. So today, if you kind of jump forward past the Kessler ruling, it's a little harder for them to overtly make claims about nicotine. and the benefits of nicotine. So they've kind of gone underground a little bit. So these are all examples from the popular media. This is actually a blog by an industry scientist. This is a kid's book, but this is actually a little older on nicotine and caffeine. These articles, though, all talk about how you can be smarter, sharper if you use nicotine. And they all contain interviews with industry scientists, but the affiliations with the industry scientists are not disclosed. So you wouldn't know by reading these articles that they were informed by e-cigarette company scientists or big tobacco. So for example, this Time magazine article says 5 things that will make you smarter. Number 3 is caffeine, sugar, and nicotine. So here's the first, right here, this Zonic. This is the first tobacco company owned NRT product that I'm aware of. It was called Zonic. It's not available here since BAT acquired RJ Reynolds recently, but RJ Reynolds just bought a pharmaceutical company that produced FDA approved nicotine product. And then they just sort of renamed it and repackaged it using their own industry strategies. So it's colorful, it's sold next to candy, in convenience stores and gas stations, not in pharmacies. It's cheap, it comes in small amounts. And the language around using this product is subtly more focused on gradual reduction. They talk about smoking, using it where you can't smoke, which I don't think that has anything to do with cessation. And they don't use the word cessation or quitting as much as these kind of other terms. This company, again, that I mentioned earlier, this is not a big tobacco company. This product is from Lucy Goods, but they use very similar tactics. So here's their recreational nicotine product. This is their FDA approved NRT product. And these are sold together by subscription. Everything's mixed together. They have a pouch product too. They have some similar color schemes. This NRT comes in flavors to match your moods. And they use very confusing language about FDA status. So it's really hard to tell what's NRT and what's not. And they also have like a pouch product that sounds a lot like Camel Crush. And they have a blog that says that you can use nicotine for pain relief and reducing inflammation. Here's the poor non-tobacco industry owned NRT product that looks, I did pick the most boring one, but they're all pretty boring looking. So that's just to contrast. So this blurring of lines between NRT and recreational nicotine, I think has a lot of potential to help the tobacco industry. You can use recreational nicotine thinking it's NRT and vice versa. So it'll be interesting to follow that. Okay, so moving on to health effects of smoking. Everyone here knows there are dozens and dozens and dozens of known health effects of smoking. And we keep finding new associations, more evidence to support the old associations. These are some of the ones specific to women: dysmenorrhea, more severe menopause, earlier menopause, and osteoporosis, both through direct effects and through earlier menopause, increased time to conception, lower success rates with ART. So with regard to pregnancy, this list that I included is really conservative. These are all things from the last couple SGR reports where the evidence was determined to be sufficient to infer a causal relationship. There's a bunch where the evidence is suggestive, and there's a bunch with good evidence that the SGR hasn't ever even reviewed. But this is just kind of a starting point to think about emerging products. So for this one, for IUGR, intrauterine growth restriction, on average, babies born to women who smoke are 200 to 400 grams lighter than unexposed. And that's when you adjust for gestational age, because it also causes preterm delivery. The only one of these that's reduced is preeclampsia. So there's this paradoxical effect where preeclampsia is less common in women who smoke. So when we're thinking about emerging products, and if we wanted to just have a starting point, because nicotine is common to all of them, if we knew which of these nicotine played a role in, then we could have at least some information to share with women either at the clinical level or the at the public health level and PSAs, et cetera, about what things they need to be concerned about. Because it takes a long time to study a new product. I do want to mention too that there are some longer term outcomes associated with cigarette smoking. I've listed them here. So behavioral problems, ADHD, mood disorders, substance use in later life, and some concerns about chronic medical problems like hypertension and obesity. Those associations, it's really tough to establish causality for those. The farther you get away from even at birth, confounding is a huge issue. And then the farther you get out, the more potential there is for more confounding. And it's just so challenging. But I did want to mention that those are also just some of the outcomes associated with smoking that are understudied and of interest. So when we're looking for effects of nicotine, there's thousands of chemicals in cigarette smoke. So how do we go about trying to figure out what nicotine is doing? We can't deliberately give women nicotine. So these are three of the ways that we can try to tease that out. So animal studies are really helpful for looking at normal embryonic and fetal development and then introducing nicotine and just looking at what changes. And there's lots of information on nicotine from that research. We can also look at the Swedish experience, which is studying the health effects of long-term snus use in Swedish men, which has been really helpful for understanding what long-term nicotine use might do. So if you're a smoker and you switch to NRT, or in this case, sometimes snus, what health effects do we need to worry about with that? And those data show that snus and probably therefore nicotine are pretty safe. There's a few little things here and there where the risk is elevated, but Swedish snus is very low in carcinogens. It's a safe product. And that's been really helpful in thinking about long-term NRT use. So we could do the same thing with pregnant women using snus, and we could kind of extrapolate from that. So there's actually a lot of research coming out now from that area. And then we can use animal models and compare them to observational studies in humans, looking at cigarette smoking, and look for overlap. And there's a lot of that has happened as well. So I'm just going to go through those and give some examples. So using animal models, we can better understand the role of nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, which is what nicotine binds in normal development. So those receptors appear at about 5 weeks in gestation, and their expression changes and increases during critical development. So here's some of the things that receptor binding the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor does. It's involved in normal development. It's involved in cell replication, switching from replication to differentiation. It's involved in regulating axogenesis and synaptogenesis, apoptosis, and cell migration for certain cell populations. So if you disrupt or mistime those processes with exogenous nicotine, those normal trajectories can be disrupted. So, and there's good animal model evidence for this. So you can trigger apoptosis too early, which can and prematurely trigger a switch to differentiation. So you can see as a result of that lower total brain DNA, which is a marker for cell number in rodent models. And in animal models too, even after you stop the exposure, those effects continue to occur when there's no more nicotine. So for studies of women using smokeless tobacco in pregnancy, like I said, most of that data is coming from Sweden. And this is just a list of the associations that the data, mostly from Sweden, supports. So interestingly, nicotine or snus has minor contributions to fetal growth restriction. That's really goes against what historically has been believed to be the case. I was always taught when I started work in this area that vasoconstriction from nicotine is what makes babies of smokers smaller, but it doesn't, these data don't support that it's the main component. It doesn't reduce the risk of preeclampsia the way cigarette smoking does. I think that was a bit of a surprise as well, and it might even increase it. And then it appears to increase the risk of infant apnea, SIDS and SUID, oral cleft defects, preterm delivery, and stillbirth. So those are all really helpful. And I don't think we necessarily knew that nicotine, I think there was suspicion about nicotine for SIDS. That's been the case for a while, but and then in a clinical study in Sweden, snus exposure in pregnancy was also associated with autonomic instability in the first couple of months of life, and increased arterial stiffness and elevated systolic blood pressure in childhood. Okay, so here's just a little bit about those data from Sweden. So they actually have snus in their birth register, which is their equivalent of our birth certificate. They only have 75,000 births a year, but they added it in 1999. So they've now got over 2 million births since they added snus. So they're now starting to look at more rare outcomes, which is why I think we're starting to see a lot of publications with their data. They are also linked to discharge hospitalization ICD codes, so we can get some other outcomes beyond what we would be able to get from our birth certificate. And they collect data on smoking. It's just categories, 10 or more or less than that. For snus, they only ask whether you're a daily snus user or not. They don't try to quantify it in any way, which could be problematic. And as you get farther into pregnancy, the ascertainment of snus use is not as good. But the early pregnancy data are pretty solid. And I think the birth register is just generally considered, the Swedish birth register is generally considered to be a high quality data set. So I'll just show you a couple of examples. I think it would be boring to go through them all because they're kind of similar study design, but I'll show a couple. So this is for preterm birth, and the adjusted odds ratio column is here. The blue rows are continuing users and the white rows are quitters. So if you just look at the blue rows, so for smoking, the odds ratio, the adjusted odds ratio for preterm birth was 1.3. That's very similar with meta-analyses. It's a modest association with smoking. And if you look at for the one for snus, they're just almost identical. So that's evidence to support a role for nicotine in preterm birth. The other one I wanted to show you is preeclampsia. They divided this into term and preterm preeclampsia because they're thought to be maybe etiologically distinct. So if you look at these bottom two rows for smoking, you can see the odds ratios are less than 1. This protective effect, again, this magnitude of this association is very in line with what previous studies have shown, but we just don't see it with snus. And for preterm preeclampsia, there's this possibility that it even increases risk. So again, I think that was a bit of a surprise. So for birth weight, always when in this talk with birth weight, it's always adjusted for gestational age because we don't want to be measuring preterm. We want to be measuring growth. So this is a sibling analysis. So they looked at sibling pairs who were discordant for snus in pregnancy. So one pregnancy, the mother used snus, and the other sibling, they didn't. And that just helps control for a lot of the unmeasured confounding that we always worry about in these observational studies. So with the sibling analysis, they did not find a significant reduction in birth weight. And it was the non-significant finding was only 20 grams. And they did the same study design with smoking, and they found between 162 and a 226 gram difference. So this is really interesting. And really suggests nicotine isn't driving these fetal growth restriction. So you might, though, look at that and say, well, maybe that's just the women who use snus just don't use very much. There's a very strong dose-response relationship between cigarettes per day and birth weight. So maybe that's it. So we tried to look at that using some data from Alaska. This is a study in Western Alaska where women use a product called ICMIC, which is leaf tobacco or twist tobacco or even commercial tobacco mixed with ash from punk fungus, has a very high pH. The freebase nicotine is very high. The nicotine content is very high. They analyzed it at the lab in CDC. So if there was any population where we should see an effect on birth weight, it's probably this one. And they also pre-masticate it. So they chew it together in batches and then save it, to parcel out for later. So they also are potentially, and that's usually the woman who does that in the family if it's being shared. And so they get a lot of nicotine from the preparation as well. So these are the results. I don't know how well you can see the cigarettes are at the top. This is a random sample of pregnancies from a complete area of service in Indian Health Service. And so there's a 300 plus birth weight adjusted for gestational age deficit in cigarette smokers. So again, what we expect. These are 3 categories of smokeless tobacco use, and they are closer to 0. The point estimates are closer to 0. None of them are significant. This is commercial choose. So these are women who only use like Skoal or Copenhagen, didn't use ICMIC. And the confidence intervals are wide because it's a small study, but it just doesn't look like that nicotine amount is driving what we found in Sweden, what they found in Sweden. So the last category are these, and more diverse than the last category where most everything is coming out of Sweden, are these analyses looking at animal models to see if they can replicate what we see in human observational studies. So these, as a body of research, this data supports a role for nicotine in SIDS, impaired lung development, and adverse respiratory outcomes in childhood. I think this is one of the most compelling associations we have. Structural brain damage and alterations in cognition and attention in human offspring is supported by that, deficits in auditory processing, and increasing vulnerability to nicotine in later life, nicotine dependence in later life. So I'm going to do the lung development example for this one. There's good biologic plausibility for this. And like I said, the evidence is really consistent. So I like this one. Nicotinic acetylcholine receptors are present in fetal lung. They're not just present in the brain. They're in other organs as well. Lung development continues throughout gestation and then after birth as well. Alveolarization keeps going until around age 8. There's a little more after that, but you're pretty close to your full adult complement of alveoli by age 8. And then after that, there's this prolonged phase of equilibrated lung growth, and that continues until full body growth is achieved. Gestation is a very vulnerable period to environmental insults. If there's injury anywhere along the way, and there's disruption of this process. So for example, if you get to adulthood and you haven't reached your full alveoli complement, you can't get it back. So you're entering adulthood without your full lung function potential. So that would make you more susceptible if there's further insult to more severe or earlier onset disease like COPD or interstitial lung disease, that kind of thing. And offspring of women who smoke do have persistent adverse effects on lung function and into childhood. So the animal models of nicotine exposure on lung function are pretty consistent across species. And this is one example where we do have some non-human primate data to support it, which is really nice. So these studies show an effect on fetal lungs, damage on fetal lungs from nicotine through decreased vascularization, alveolar hypoplasia, decreased lung volume, increased pulmonary resistance, and very similar to what we see in babies of smokers. And so basically, nicotine exposure in gestation results in larger and fewer air spaces, so less surface area for gas exchange, and reduced pulmonary capacity. There's also increased collagen deposition, so the thickness for air exchange, and then decreased lung elastin. So you get this decreased compliance, and that affects expiratory flow rates. So we can start to compile all this and start listing the findings from these animal models and the human studies. This slide is a little bit old. I borrowed it. We could add a few more rows, but you can see we're starting to see a pattern where we can identify the role of nicotine in some of these effects that we see in people. For e-cigarettes themselves, we really don't have a lot of data on reproductive outcomes. There's like almost nothing on fertility, for example. We do have some pregnancy data coming out. A lot of it's from PRAMs. I find the PRAMs e-cigarette papers really confusing. I think it's because of the way they collect exposure data, 3 months before and last 3 months. I find it very confusing, and sometimes I read those papers and I have no idea what they mean. But I think this one's pretty straightforward, this analysis here. So They just took no e-cigarette use in pregnancy and e-cigarette use only in pregnancy and no cigarette use, no tobacco product use in pregnancy for their comparison group. And these are the outcomes that they looked at: preterm, low birth weight, and SGA. So they did find a significant association with preterm and low birth weight, which probably is just reflecting that increase in preterm, and nothing for SGA. So really consistent with what we found or what we see in Alaska and Sweden. So given what we know about nicotine, what are the warning labels telling pregnant women about nicotine use? So this is the required warning label for e-cigarettes and oral tobacco products. So really nothing, doesn't really tell them anything. This product contains nicotine. Nicotine is addictive. The California one's a little stronger, a little more forceful, but at the federal level, this is it. It's such a fine line, right? We don't want people to be scared off from NRT if they think that would be helpful for them, but also we don't want pregnant people to just use it thinking that it's not, that it's harmless. It's a tough call, but anyway, that's what it says. So, how am I doing on time? So given all that we know about the potential health effects of nicotine on pregnancy, and all the uncertainty about nicotine in pregnancy, and that women are really motivated to quit when they quit tobacco when they're pregnant, how do women view these products? This is a recent review. This is a lot of qualitative results, synthesizing perceptions around e-cigarettes and NRT as well. And so some of the highlights for the purposes of this talk are: women are highly motivated to protect their babies. We kind of knew that. Generally, pregnant women thought e-cigarettes are safer than smoking, but they're also worried about maybe it delivering more nicotine to the baby. And there wasn't really a clear pattern with whether or not they thought it could help them quit. Some of the studies, including this synthesis, are sort of old, so it'd be interesting to pull out the more recent ones and see if those are different. They also thought NRT is safer than smoking, also worried that it's giving the baby too much nicotine. And there's also concern about nicotine being addictive. So, you use one addictive product and then you use another addictive product. How does that help you? So we did, this is old. This is a study we did in 2013, but I included it because we also looked at oral products, and I haven't seen anything more recent that includes that. And also this study was part of that synthesis that I just showed you. So most of what we found is in that list I just went through. But we had focus groups in some cities with very high smoking prevalence, and we included pregnant women who smoke, pregnant women who quit, and smokers who were planning a pregnancy. And we did, in addition to cigarettes, we did NRT and these oral products. So these are a couple additional findings from that project. The first one is regarding e-cigarettes, and that was that there was a lot of concern, especially in the pregnant women, that there's no natural stopping point to an e-cigarette. So they may have really worked hard to get down to 1 cigarette a day, and then they switched to e-cigarettes, and all of a sudden they're just using it way longer than they ever intended. So that really bothered some women. Ooh, looks like I need to format that. So the next thing I know, I've been outside 30 minutes and I'm like, oh God, I got to go back to work or whatever. The dissolvable, just kind of the general reaction to dissolvables was really mixed. Some people thought they looked awful, like rat food. They didn't want anything to do with them. But other people thought, oh, you could use that, and I'm pregnant and I don't want people to see me smoke. So maybe you wouldn't get judged because you could hide it better than smoking. I don't like being judged by people. I hate that. And then there was also this totally surprised me. There was this perception that when you take something by mouth, it goes right to the baby. So women would describe, well, I inhale a cigarette, and I don't really know what happens after that. Maybe it gets to the baby, maybe it doesn't. But if I'm swallowing it, that's where it's going. It's going right to the baby. So it's kind of like feeding it to your baby directly. You're feeding it cigarettes. It's crazy. That's one quote on that. So if we go back to our continuum of risk framework, I think when we're talking to patients or developing public health communication. I think we know more than just, oh, that product, it's not a cigarette, so it's safer than cigarettes. I think we can really start to get into some detail about these are the risks that still go along with using a product with nicotine. So then women can make really informed choices about, do they want to use NRT? Do they want to just quit? Do they want to use this or that product? The more we can tell them, the more they can make an informed choice. Okay, so I'll try to get this is my last two slides. I'll try to go through quickly because I know I'm at time. So thinking about it more at the population level, I do really like the precautionary principle for vulnerable populations. And that's just that you don't let scientific uncertainty you don't use scientific uncertainty to postpone measures to protect public health. I think that's appropriate for pregnant women and children. It kind of feels like it's a little late for that. They're out there. We still have flavored e-cigarette products even after an epidemic of e-cigarette use in youth. But the precautionary principle also includes monitoring really closely, and when you see an unintended consequence, reacting to it straight away. So I think there's a lot of potential to still do that. The precautionary principle is really addressed very thoroughly in the 2016 SGR on e-cigarettes. And also it's part of the FDA authorization process. So you have to show benefit to public health when you're getting authorization for new product claims. But I just wanted to focus a little bit on issues specific to pregnancy and not go through the whole thing. But so unintended consequences of these growing markets so far have already included this growth in use of e-cigarettes in youth. And now it looks like also in the younger women who are having children, according if PRAMS is correct. And others that we should probably be watching for are increased prevalence of nicotine exposure, either through more tobacco product use in general, which we need good surveillance for that. We don't have complete surveillance for tobacco product use in pregnancy. And at the individual level, we could also see increased nicotine exposure either through dual use or increased frequency and intensity of use of some of these newer products, or even if there's advances in technology that increase nicotine delivery. So, and we don't have good studies with cotinine levels in at a wide level, or at a broad level for these products. So what we have in our favor is that pregnant women know that nicotine has detrimental effects on fetal health, and cessation rates look like they're high if we can believe the self-reports that we see. Women don't take up tobacco while they're pregnant, but they do bring behaviors with them from before their childbearing years. Some vulnerabilities that we might need to be worried about are there's strong desire to reduce stigma, which can also work for you, but can be problematic. Potentially misconceptions about nicotine exposure. So if you think you get less nicotine from a cigarette than you do from other mechanisms, that's not great. And then always attraction to product claims about it being, cleaner, the social acceptability issues and things I think are also concerning for this group. So with that in mind, I think we should continue to monitor product development. It's changing so fast and we have to just stay on top of it. And also industry tactics like some of the ones I was just showing. And we can't assume that attitudes toward these products are static. So just because women used to think oral products were awful and they didn't want anything to do with them. I mean, I don't know. I thought those ads looked pretty appealing. So we have to continue to assess perceptions toward those products. Our surveillance for pregnant women is not very timely. PRAMS is not really fast. So if there are changes in use, we may not be aware of them until, and we don't even, like I said, we don't do surveillance on anything other than e-cigarettes and combusted cigarettes. The more we learn about the health effects, the more we can advise patients, inform patients so they can make choices. And that information has to be communicated to providers because they're still a trusted source of information, especially during pregnancy. And it's very hard to keep up. Now that I'm on the clinical side, I can relate. It's very hard to keep up with all this stuff. So we have to provide them up-to-date information that they can use in a clinical setting. And I think we need to counter these industry efforts to normalize recreational nicotine, especially for vulnerable populations. And I'm sorry I went a little bit over, but if you have want any of the articles that I showed or anything, just send me an email. I'll be happy to share. sources.
For that wonderful lecture, and we have plenty of time for questions. So please use the mic so people who are with us remotely can hear the questions and the answers. So please come forward. Don't be shy, but I'll pick this up. So, you know, many things, you addressed a wide range of things. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on, and it's because what we in our center focus on, the women who are not quitting during pregnancy, which, you know, is the more SES disadvantaged women, rural women. And they seem to be, especially the rural disparity seems to be growing. So I'm just curious, any thought, and you're in West Virginia.
I'm in West Virginia, yeah. So you mean just generally, how do we reach those people?
Yeah, any thoughts? Yeah, what's on your mind about them? I mean, we have developed incentive-based treatments. They seem to respond to those better than what we're currently offering on,
Yeah.
you know, through quit lines, which are pretty ineffective in our studies. And now you're also, as you mentioned, on the clinical side. So I'm just curious, as an expert, what's on your mind about those
Yeah.
women?
Yeah, I mean, quit lines are tricky. They're very cumbersome. It puts a lot of it puts a lot of responsibility on the patient. They got to follow up. They got to, I don't know. I've had a lot of trouble coordinating with quit lines. I don't know if that's true in other states, but I agree with you. Yeah. On that. I think, I feel like I'm not going to say anything that's not already pretty obvious, but I think we have to bring care to people. So we had to talk about this last night about not rural areas, but people who are unsheltered, and a lot of people with substance use feel very put off by going to so I think the more that we can do where people are, but rural areas is tough because without a lot of funding to set things up, it's hard to and contingency management. I don't know if you have thoughts about how to get that out to rural areas, but I mean, I know that's effective and probably and particularly so for that population, but yeah, it's a tough question. I didn't really answer it.
Great talk. Thank you so much. You know, all this data about vaping and e-cigarettes is so concerning, and you might have covered some of this, so I missed it, but I'm just curious, what are the required warnings on e-cigarettes and vaping products, and how clear is it what the potency is? And then finally, what's the price point of those relative to cigarettes?
Oh, that's a good question. So your last question, I do not know the answer to. This is the warning label for e-cigarettes and dissolvables. That's it. So it's addictive. And if you believe what the industry is telling you, that it's going to make you smarter, you might not even care if it's addictive. So I don't know. I personally think there should be something better for pregnancy and adolescence.
Anything about potency on their required?
I'm sorry?
Anything required about potency?
I'm not sure if there are regulations on how they have to. I hadn't heard that there were. I only know that, like I said, my patients don't know, most of them don't know what the nicotine strength is when I ask them. I think I've had one person who said he knew. I don't know if other people have experiences to share with that, but I don't know of any requirements for like font size or placement. Does anybody know if that's regulated? No? Okay. We don't think it's regulated. Show of hands. Yeah, and I don't know about price points. That's a good question though. I think I bought an ELF bar. So we're seeing some people with drug testing that's positive in our clinic who say they're not using, but they're using ELF bar. And there's this huge counterfeit industry now with ELF bar. So I bought one. We were going to do some product testing, and it was like $26, but I don't know how long that might last someone, but I was surprised how expensive it was.
Thank you. So I was curious, in your practice, do you encounter questions about using e-cigarettes to quit smoking, and how do you address those questions with the one you see?
So no, usually people are already using e-cigarettes. I have a lot of people who used to smoke and use e-cigarettes. I shouldn't say a lot. I've only been doing this for 9 months, but I do have people who switched on their own. When that happens, I don't, I just keep trying to help them get off their e-cigarettes. I don't, say, oh, you shouldn't have done that. That's fine. Always I offer NRT for smokers or e-cigarette users, encourage them to do that. If somebody asked me if they, could I help them switch to e-cigarettes, I might just, I really like to let people, I like it to come from them, but I might suggest that they at least try NRT first, and give it a go and see, and then just keep my fingers crossed. But no, that question hasn't come up. And also our patient population, they're all using other substances. We don't see anybody just for that. So there's not a lot of interest in smoking cessation to start with, because people are, trying to get off meth or other things. And most people just really want to keep smoking or vaping or whatever. But I keep trying. Anything else?
I have one. I'm curious, I'm calling on your insider information, but what are the barriers to improving PRAMs? We all recognize limitations in the form that it's in, but what? Yeah.
I would say because it's so decentralized, so the states all run their own programs. So if we want to, and then everybody sends stuff to CDC. So I'm not at CDC anymore, but at least this is how it was when I left. They send all their stuff, but if we want to introduce a new question, for example, so when we wanted to add e-cigarettes, we had to find interested states. And now it's in many, many more states. It might even be in all of them. But only 2 or 3 states initially even wanted to add it. And then, so much of it is done at the state level, and it's only kind of the final cleaning and weighting and all that is done through CDC. So it's just really slow. It's not the worst. It's not the worst surveillance that we have, but, and then the birth certificate's awful too. It took us, I think, over 10 years to get the birth certificate switched from using LMP for gestational age to obstetrical estimate. Even though everybody else is using obstetrical estimate, LMP data is so flawed, and it took 10 or 15 years to, and it wasn't even changed. It was just how it was analyzed. It wasn't even changing the data collection. It was just the instructions and the analysis. So I think that's even more hopeless, but that would be great, because that comes out every year, and it's the ascertainments probably wouldn't be that good, but I think that would be I don't want to say the easiest, because obviously it's not easy, but that would make the most sense to me if they could do that. So.
Hi, that was wonderful. Thank you. I feel like every time I come to this conference or I'm hearing these topics, I just feel like this problem is really insurmountable. And I'm wondering, I keep thinking about prevention, right? And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on maybe one thing, like say the system we could just perfect the system, start over, whatever it would be. Do you have one thought on prevention technique that would, let me give you some more background of what I'm thinking. I'm thinking of these vulnerable adolescent females who maybe have depression or anxiety, start smoking, and then trying to get them to quit smoking is just so hard. I'm wondering if there's one thing you can think of that would help prevent them at that age, that, could help us fix this problem down the line. Well,
my first thought, and I'm not trying to be like sarcastic or snarky, anything, is healthcare for all.
Yes. Yeah.
That would open up so many doors, right? So that people could get their root causes treated and not self-medicate and all these things. So in terms of tightening up regulation around youth, I would have to think about like what would be the one thing that would be the most effective. I mean, clearly FDA was way too slow in implementing, and like, why do we still have flavored products? So that's probably no one thing is going to fix it, but getting the appeal out of the picture would probably be a big step. Yeah, I wish people could get their depression treated
Yes,
in a
yeah.
timely fashion. And
Thank
so,
you.
Yeah.
We have a couple questions online.
Okay.
One of them, we have Rhonda Williams asks, as a provider and the audience, what are your thoughts about integrating CM into clinical OBGYN or family practice to assist with quitting smoking and e-cigarettes?
I am probably not the best person to answer that, but I think that'd be a fantastic idea. And I know they do it at our institution. They do a lot of contingency management. I don't know if it's with smoking, but they do it for other substances like methamphetamine. So if anybody else has suggestions about that, please feel free to speak up. But I don't personally have experience with it. It's labor intensive. I mean, maybe you want to answer that question, Steve. It's labor intensive. It's just, I don't see it in our institution as becoming broad enough that people would use it for tobacco, for example.
Yeah. I guess my answer is we're working on it, and sort of you mentioned slow.
Yeah.
But Rhonda is one of our collaborators from the Vermont Department of Health. And what we're hopeful about is we have a smartphone-based intervention now with CM for pregnant women. And we ran one trial that's been published. We recruited nationwide, and it was efficacious, just about this almost identical outcomes to in-person, although we didn't get the birth outcomes, just it was a bit difficult. But yeah, that's what I'm hopeful for. And you know, I'm especially interested in trying to bring care to rural women. So given that contingency management is also already operating in West Virginia, that would be an ideal state. Vermont, we're collaborating with some folks in Kansas and also Washington State. And what we're interested in are states that have already gotten a waiver from CMS that they can reimburse people for using incentives, and other states that are thinking about it, which I'd include Vermont in that, and I think maybe West Virginia, and then states like Kansas that are on the far end for political reasons. Maybe we can move them further along by with good data. So yeah.
So that'd be great if it works by phone. I mean, that opens up all kinds of opportunities. So what are the incentives that are used?
We send a monetary incentive to a debit card.
Okay.
And it can all be done remotely. And there's a company, Dynamic Care, that supported the trial we did, and they're interested. Although, you know, money is going to factor into being able to afford it, but I'm an optimist by nature. So we're moving forward, and I'm going to be talking to different people here at the conference about interest in collaborating and helping to move that.
Well, yeah, thank you for that question. I'm going to go back and ask more about that because it's not part of our clinic, and so I haven't had any direct exposure to it. But now I want to know what we're doing more. Is Eric more?
Yeah, we have another online question. This is from Skip Murray. Considering that words like addict and junkie are considered stigmatizing, and we have switched to person first language, person who uses drugs, why are we still using words like smoker?
Good question. I am trying to train myself not to say smoker, and I still slip. So you are absolutely correct.
We have one more. We have an anonymous attendee. Doesn't have a question, but just listed it FYI. Just an FYI to answer a question asked. Labeling requirements under 21 CFR 1143.3 includes all deemed tobacco products. And they provided a link, which if anyone wishes for that, then I will make that available.
Thank you.
Well, Lucy, thank you for a wonderful lecture. Or
welcome.
did you have something to say?
No, I was
No.
just trying to figure out how to.
Oh,
close out,
okay.
but maybe
Thank you
somebody
for a
else-
wonderful lecture and a wonderful Q&A session.